Hello, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, good welcome. as better presenters than I've ever said. Welcome to Rock Around the Clock, a little earlier today than normal, but this is the new home for Rock Around the Clock. The show is essentially relaunching this week. It'll be much more of a round table with guests and news, but it'll happen on probably once a week format on a Wednesday, I hope. Now, today, very special guest today, as I know most of you know, because I've been letting you know that. We have with us today a lady from Unit 2 Games, Hannah, who is the operations director. And as you know, Unit 2 are very shortly launching Crayta exclusively to Stadia. And I'm very excited that she's been able to join us today. Lots of interviews have already happened or are about to take place with Crayta. But the key thing is most of those have talked about the platform itself. And I felt that it would be interesting from the Rock Around the Clock perspective to talk to Unit 2 about what it means to bring a game to market and the sort of trials and tribulations of what goes on behind the scenes. So without further ado, let me bring on Hannah. I've got all sorts of clever graphicry and things which I'm going to just pop up here. So there we go. And there is Hannah. Hi, Hannah. Good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. Thank you for taking time on your bank holiday Monday. Let's face it, it's prime gaming time.
Well, I was going to say, what is time anymore with the lockdown?
Fair point for some of us, mainly me. I think every day's been a bank holiday, to be completely honest with you. So thank you very much for coming. As I say, I'm just explaining to the audience that what I feel is lots of discussions, lots of videos from yourselves and others about the platform of Crayta, which looks absolutely amazing. But I thought it would be useful for people particularly that follow my content to get a bit more of a feel for what it's like to build a game, develop a game, bring a game to market. Now, you're essentially the operations director of Unit 2, although before we went live, we talked about the fact that truthfully you're a Swiss Army knife, in a nice way. In a nice way. Maybe not quite as hard, but in a nice way. And essentially that means that you get involved with lots of stuff behind the scenes. Maybe you could just give us a brief overview of what an operations director does, particularly for Unit 2.
Of course. So in general, when someone asks me what I do, like what my job is, I sort of panic a little bit because it's quite difficult to describe. But in essence, a Swiss Army knife is a great analogy for it, but I do bits of everything. So generally operations directors kind of handle the behind the scenes stuff of running a business. So all the kind of operations, obviously. And my role has kind of varied over the course of Unit 2 Games' lifespan. So obviously at the start, I was doing things like sorting out a premises for us to work from, kind of trying to get a feel for how people wanted the business to run. Because we started the company with 19 people who'd previously worked together. So we wanted to make sure that we kind of carried across the good bits of working together and not the bad bits. We changed things, all that sort of stuff. So that's sort of where I started out. And as we've progressed through creating Crayta, nowadays I'm doing much more on the kind of community management, PR and marketing side, while also doing kind of other operations stuff. In the middle, I did a bunch of business development. I'm also currently kind of doing some of the actual kind of dev work on the game itself. So it's a very varied job, which I love. But I guess if you ask kind of 3 operations directors what they do, you'll get 4 different answers. Really, it's one of those things.
Are you the kind of go-to person? Are you the one that something's not happening over in that corner and they go and see Hannah, she'll sort it out? Is that you?
For a lot of stuff, yeah. On the tech side, obviously, we've got some tech directors for that sort of thing. But quite often, I'm kind of the touch point between kind of our community and us and all those sorts of things. So I'm generally quite on the pulse, I guess.
Yeah. And I know your background is predominantly game development and essentially around operations management, a whole bunch of different things. And we were saying earlier, and you just mentioned as well, there were 19 of you originally when Unit 2 started. And did you all come from the same background, from the same business?
Yeah, so at the point where we started Unit 2 Games, it was we had previously been working at a company called Radiant Worlds on a game called Sky Saga that was for a South Korean developer called Smartgate. They'd unfortunately decided to take that project internally. We were an external developer working for them. And at that point, the people who owned Radiant Worlds were able to sell it. That's now Rebellion Warwick, essentially. Okay. But the people who owned Radiant Worlds and obviously got some income from that sale were then able to set up Unit 2 Games. So Richard Smithies is our CEO at Unit 2 Games. He was the COO of Radiant Worlds.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, he used some of the money that he got from that sale to set up Unit 2 Games. Crayta itself is something that we've wanted to make for a really long time. I mean, I first started working with Richard, probably about 10 years ago, when I got my kind of first real industry job. I'd previously worked on kind of indie games. I did the business side for a very, very small indie dev. It was just the two of us. But my first kind of real industry job was as a community manager for a project called Indie City. And now that was essentially a website where indie developers could sell their games, because at that point you couldn't sell games on Steam unless you had a contact at Steam, basically. None of Steam Greenlight hadn't come out, none of that existed. So that's sort of where I started. And we've taken that same philosophy of kind of empowering people to create and share their own content. We put some of that into Sky Saga. So Sky Saga was sort of an MMO, but kind of a Minecraft-esque MMO, I guess. But we were putting a lot of the kind of creativity side into that, so people were able to kind of create what we called home islands and share those with their friends. But we wanted to be able to give them more power than we were able to within the constraints of that game. So that's sort of where Crayta came from. We wanted to empower people to create games. That's sort of the long story short, I'd say, but I rambled for quite a bit there.
No, that's perfect, because it led into the next question, which was where did the idea of Crayta come from? Yeah. So I was able to, midway, it was quite professional, you know. I guess the thing that struck me is that there's been, certainly since Minecraft, I mean, look, I remember game development titles, going back in, to people like Kai's Power Tools, which you would never have heard of, but, this is going way back into the distant past.
Yeah.
So that's always been something, I think, that crossover between non-developers who love to be able to get involved in the marketplace and develop their own stuff. And the fact that, of course, big grown-up developers use incredibly complicated tools.
Yeah.
And huge amounts of skill and knowledge. So getting that kind of fine line, and we saw it, of course, with Minecraft that you mentioned earlier, which has been massively successful. And again, that ability to go beyond simply creating a world that you can then bring to life or introduce to your friends and bring your friends into and so on. And Crayta, to me, goes another leap beyond there. So you've got, in essence, I said to you earlier, I struggle when people call it a game, because frankly, it's a game development platform, happens to live inside of a gaming platform, and happens to have games within it. So it's really hard to kind of put it down into a 30-second elevator pitch, isn't it? But in terms of living on Stadia, I guess that's a marriage made in heaven, because you've got the resources of Google, you've got an audience that are passionate about games, and it allows you to do stuff that you probably may be restricted to in other platforms. Would you say that was the case?
Yeah, I would say even further than that, actually. So what we want to do with Crayta is we looked at kind of the game creation space, and you're right, people who make games for a living use very complicated tools. There are a lot of barriers to entry. They're, both kind of sociological and kind of financial and educational. That there's just a lot that prevents people from getting into the ability to create games. And we wanted to kind of bring those barriers down to enable more people to make games. And Stadia kind of adds to that even further, because cloud gaming itself makes gaming more accessible. It means you don't have to spend a gazillion pounds on a massive gaming rig and upgrade it every year. You can run it on a cheap netbook or on a kind of
phone.
On a phone. Yeah, you can run it on basically any device that you already have. And that just kind of multiplied out for us. We were so excited when we first talked to Google, because it aligned so well with what we wanted to do with Crayta. It was just a perfect fit, really, for us.
No, that's really interesting. And of course, one of the things that came across to me, both in terms of the conversations we've been having behind the scenes, but also just looking at more about Unit 2, is there's a definite passion about inclusivity and how you can. I think it's right at the core of the company. Wouldn't you agree?
Very much so.
How can you get not just able-bodied and able-minded people, but people from all walks of life and different cultures and so on? How can you cross barriers to give them tools to enable them to do things that have been very elitist up until now?
Yeah, so I guess that's something that I was sort of touching on when I mentioned the kind of sociological reasons that people don't go into games development. It's still, even now, seen very much as a white, cis-het, male-oriented industry. And that doesn't need to be the case. And I think that the really exciting thing about Crayta is that if we can open up the creation of games to people outside that fairly small niche of people that currently make games, we'll see some incredible things. We've already seen some of that come through with tools like Twine and Bitsy are great. They're fairly limited in scope in terms of the output. It's not a high fidelity output, but the amount of kind of indie games and experimental games that have been created by people that wouldn't normally be kind of games industry people, it's just incredible.
No, you're right. I mean, one of the things that I get asked to do occasionally is go and do things like mock interviews with local college kids and so on. And almost exclusively, they will say to me, when I say, well, what would you like to do? Well, I'd love to be able to develop games. I'd love to be involved in the game development industry. I think certainly over the last 10 to 15 years, that's become one of the real key interests. But sadly, predominantly, it's been the lads, the boys.
Yeah.
And that, I know, again, is something that's very passionate to you.
Yeah,
it is to me as well.
Yeah, it starts at a really early age as well. It's kind of around the age of kind of 11, 12 that kind of girls and boys start to diverge in terms of not necessarily interests, but about what they're willing to pursue in terms of interests. I don't have kids myself, but like my best friend has 2 daughters, and I know he's kind of struggled a lot with getting them to pursue the things that maybe they want to pursue, I guess. There's a lot of obstacles still, and things that are seen as, oh no, but that's a boys thing. It's rubbish, basically.
Totally rubbish. But even more so when you look at the stats and you see that actually in terms of gaming, it's very split down the middle.
Yeah.
In terms of gender, and yet it still kind of has that perception of being a smelly boy in the back bedroom.
Oh yeah, and I mean, if you look at every time an article comes out that says about the fairly even gender split, you can look at comments and they'll all be like, oh, but those are just mobile games, like those don't count. Or, oh, but those are just casual games, like only AAA games count as games. And it can be a very elitist thing, and it's sort of a self-perpetuating thing as well, because it can be so toxic for people who aren't men. People avoid it, and therefore it doesn't get better. And we just kind of want to break that. We want to create a community in which everyone is welcome and everyone can make and create and share the games.
No, I think that's really honourable, and interestingly enough, the Stadia community is relatively small at the moment. That's not to suggest that the user base is, but certainly the vocal community and the one that a lot of us content creators belong to. But I think one of the things that we've all said unanimously is that the difference in attitude from the toxicity of a lot of the console or PC communities, and we're desperately trying to keep that the way that is. I think some of that comes from a slightly older mindset.
Yeah.
I think with Google looking at casual gamers, and it's one of the good benefits of Stadia is, of course, how easy it is to fire it up. So if you are someone that has limited time, and you have a family or a job or what have you, then you can fire the thing up very quickly. So it's not necessarily the home of the 12-hour, 14-hour gamer. So I think it's a great place to start. And I think for a title like Crayta, it's a perfect community to invest in. And I'm sure. So what I'd like to just quickly move on to, Hannah, if you don't mind, is because it'll be of interest to obviously everybody in the Stadia community. So talk to me about how Google Stadia first became involved.
Sure. So obviously, as I mentioned earlier, kind of a midpoint in the project, I guess, between starting and now, I did a lot of business development. We started looking for investment. We started looking for kind of opportunities and what was out there. We've been big believers in cloud gaming for the reasons I mentioned earlier for quite a long time. So when we got an introduction to Google, we were pretty enthusiastic to find out a bit more. We obviously knew about Project Stream at that point. And so we went along to their offices. We had a trial of Stadia. It was just blew our minds how good it was. They'd stuck a controller in our hand. We played something on a netbook, and we just took it in turns, going, how is there no input lag? I don't quite understand how this feels as good as it feels.
It's magic.
And pretty much we were pretty much sold from that point, to be honest. It is really incredible, and we're very fortunate that they feel similarly about Crayta. Really, that they're very enthusiastic about it from our perspective. So
was that a pitch to you from Google, or was that a pitch from you to Google?
It was a bit of both. I think it was primarily a pitch from us to Google, but obviously because Stadia was so under wraps at that point, they had to kind of explain it all to us as well. So there was a bit of give and take there.
Right.
But, yeah.
So in essence, you were looking, as all businesses do, you were looking when you've got an IP like you guys have got, and you've got this amazing dream, and a huge box of experience that you brought with you. So you're looking for people to back you, because I don't know how whether or not people really appreciate the amount of time and money that goes in to a project like this. And of course, it isn't simply about the cost of development. Marketing a product like this costs, in some cases, a lot more than the cost of development. So it's important that you have backers and you have people that are there with you. So you were going out looking for people to come on board and potentially invest, and Google was on the shopping list. So at that point, you weren't even aware of Stadia as a concept?
So we as I said, we knew that Project Stream was a thing, but Stadia in its kind of current form, I mean, I don't think it wasn't even called Stadia when they first told us about it. So it was fairly early days, but it was just incredible tech-wise, and we were like, well, as long as the tech works, then we're golden, right? That's the difficult bit to get right, really.
So at that point, Hannah, had you guys been thinking about Crayta existing as a cloud-based application, or was it always going to live on a PC or a console?
So initially, it was a PC-based product, and that was primarily just because it was the easiest to test. We did some early kind of what we called pre-alpha testing, which was probably even earlier stage than pre-alpha would be normally. And we did that all via PC just because it's the easiest way to kind of transfer stuff, get people playing it. We had it all running via a website to launch games. So instead of having a front-end menu within the game, it was all via a website. I think if you look back on our YouTube channel, you can see some of that from a couple of years ago.
Wow.
So there was a fair amount of work to get it into a kind of self-contained console product for Stadia. But it's all kind of come together really well. I think it matches or even exceeds our kind of initial goal, really, in terms of the inclusivity and accessibility of it. Being packaged as a Stadia game kind of is what like more than we could have hoped for when we started out, really.
It was almost a match made in heaven, weren't they? So at the time, neither of you knew that, and that's the best heavenly made matches are, I guess.
Yeah.
And now you can look back and you can say, wow, actually, if we had started out with this project with Stadia in mind, probably would have ended up at the same place. So yeah, it was kind of fortuitous, and that's amazing. And in terms of how that's benefited you, as Unit 2, the advantages for you guys, apart from the fact that you've got essentially a supporter there. And I appreciate that there are contracts and NDAs and stuff, so I'm not going to push you on it. But just in terms of the working relationship and the knowledge and so on, how has that helped the development of the project?
Yeah, it's been great. We've worked really closely, kind of side by side with Stadia. We're in really regular touch with them, both on the kind of pretty much on the tech side and kind of daily contact. There is some stuff that I can't currently yet talk about, but we should be able to very soon, which is really exciting. But yeah, we've been working really closely with them on the tech side, especially. It's been really, really great. They've been really supportive. They kind of very much understand the vision of Crayta and want to help us make it a success.
Yeah, I think again, we were talking beforehand, and I said, the thing about Google, Stadia is Google anyway. It's very much a company of developers, vision, and connectivity. So working with an outfit ourselves, which is not, I know in terms of the business longevity, it's not a huge time frame. So in their world, you was also seen as an embryonic company. But to come project must have taken certain losses for Stadia. Of course, they've been doing the rounds with developers that can offer these games, and then they become a project just sits outside that box. But at the same time, was dealing with developers at Stadia, and they can see how the must suddenly takes a direction.
Sorry, the sound's got a bit odd again.
Sorry.
I might leave and come back and see if that fixes it. Okay, I will attempt to do that.
I will to catch up and They thank you so much. It's been a chat. As you can see, my microphone is on.
I'm afraid it's not. I'm not entirely sure how to make it work.
Last time I did think it worked away. So I'll suddenly take all the songs. Very quickly. Did that help?
It did not, but we can try and work through it.
Well, we've only got one or two questions left.
Okay.
Because I know you've sessions. As you've said you're currently doing more research, so you've got stuff to do. People to talk to. So very quickly, now let me go. The thing just provides the future for Unit 2 and Crayta.
Okay, cool. So, Unit 2 Games is currently a single title studio and is for the foreseeable future a single title studio. We were founded specifically to make Crayta, and we envisage supporting it for a really long time. We're running it as a games as a service. We have a huge swathe of features and upgrades and all sorts on the roadmap that we're really keen on. But what we're most interested in terms of kind of future roadmap-y stuff actually is seeing how people get on with it when it's actually released into the wild. We're in the process of setting up a kind of feedback board, and we really want it to be the development of Crayta to be guided by the players. So if when we come out, everyone's like, oh man, this would be amazing if we had vehicle physics, then that will bump the priority of vehicle physics up. But we've got a whole list of stuff, and I'm sure a whole bunch of stuff that we've never even thought of will be added as soon as it's released. So it's hard to predict the future like that. But yeah, we've got a long roadmap planned for supporting Crayta, and that's the foreseeable future.
Wow, that's amazing, and I think it's going to be hugely successful. And we've touched on the fact that it'll be launching soon. So we know it's the summer. So, huge amount of good luck with that. I'm sure you'll
Thank you.
to be fair. Thank you so much for taking time out.
Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, absolute pleasure. And please send my regards to the whole team. And we'll all be
Will
rooting for you. I know it's going to be a huge success. I'm absolutely certain of that. So I will let you go. And thank you very much indeed for coming in today. You take care.
Thank you.
And now then, guys, let's have a look here. I saw you all complaining about my audio. What would a Rokk show be without technical gremlins? And I have no idea why you can struggle with my mic. It's a good mic. So that's, just how can I say? Anyway, that was Hannah from Unit 2, Crayta Games. Absolutely amazing lady, amazing product. I'm convinced that it's going to be hugely successful. I think, again, on so many levels, it's going to open Stadia up in a direction that I don't think any of us envisaged. And certainly from my perspective, coming from the sort of software development world, I can't wait to get my hands on it. I'm sure you'll be the same too. We'll have a quick look at some chat before we go. Most of it's saying, Rokk, sort yourself out, boy, your microphone's terrible. What can I say? I'm doing my best. And Stadia Mania says, thanks, Hannah. Absolutely. It's really nice of them to let us talk to Hannah on a bank holiday. And I was particularly keen to talk to Hannah because, like me, she has passion about young ladies and generally people that are in the minority that aren't necessarily exposed to the game development or software development market. And that's something that needs to change. And it'll only come from us, the community, ensuring that we make it a welcoming place, because I think it can be intimidating, and that's half the problem. So, that's something that we need to sort out, people. And I, for one, am quite sad when I look at the stats for all of my shows. It says 100% male. And that depresses me. I've got two lovely daughters and a wife. I've even got one of those. She stayed with me for 30 years. What's that all about? We've got to try to get more ladies into the community and promote those that are doing stuff already. So it starts with us. Let's get moving on that one. What else have we got? Let's have a quick look in. Duncan is likening me to a Dalek. Thanks, mate. That's very kind of you. I know I've got a similar size waist. Let me see, what else have we got? Yeah, no, Daz is also saying that I sound like Davros, King of the Daleks. That's actually showing your age, mate, because nobody under 30 has a chance of knowing what a Davros Dalek sounds like. I look like it, mind you. Nice. There we go. Yeah. So interesting times. Crayta's coming soon. Now, I don't know any more than you do when it's launching, but I'm fairly convinced it'll be sooner than we think. And of course, we've got another Connect coming up in June, theoretically, certainly again in the next few weeks. And I wouldn't mind betting that we'll see some of the new YouTube features in and around that time. And it'll be amazing because I think what we'll see is that Crayta will be the vanguard for a lot of the new features that Stadia brings out. I think it's the wunderkind for the platform and be a test bed for a lot of those things. So, keep eyes open on that one. And we are getting up to 4 o'clock, so I'm going to keep this one sweet and short, particularly if you're having fun hearing me, because I know what I sound like normally, let alone when I sound like a reverberating robot. Let me have a quick look, make sure there's anything else here. Kelly wants me to do better. And that's, bless her. I don't know what it was that I did wrong, but please tell Kelly to thank you, Kelly. Right. Oh, and we've got some morning all, which I love. So Robert's joining us from somewhere where the sun's only just risen, which is amazing. Robert, we've kept the morning warm for you, mate. We looked after it, so it's over to you now. We've relayed the morning down your way. Right, that's going to be it for me today. Just to reiterate a couple of things. So this will be the new format for Rokk Around the Clock. I'm using Restream, and this studio is a fairly new product for them. So they're ironing out some bugs and bits and pieces, which is probably why I'm sounding a bit odd. But I will look at that. I will fix it for you. Wednesday evening, this coming Wednesday, at 8 p.m. UK, I will have none other than Tommy from Stadia Source as my Rock Around the Clock guest, and we'll be looking at the news thus far. Given Tuesday is tomorrow, and that's usually when there's some quite decent announcements made, I think we might have some interesting stuff to talk about on Wednesday, so look forward to that. And Friday, of course, is the next edition of Rockstars at Night. It can only get better than last week. It was hilarious, I grant you, and much ale was consumed. But the old technical gremlins came with me. They come with me everywhere I go. You know this. This is becoming what I'm famed for. Oh, and don't forget, tomorrow night, 9 o'clock, Clive Illenden and I in Generation X Retro Gaming Club, where we will be looking at things like Space Invaders. One of the things that I'm really keen on Crayta with, actually, is the ability to recreate some of that stuff. Copyrights and, trademarks, obviously, accepted. But I think it'll be amazing to we'll actually start to see some really interesting takes on some of those old school games built from Crayta. So we actually are really keen on that, and we're having a think about how we can encourage that. So stay tuned. That's something we'll talk about in the near future. And after selling the hell out of everything else, I suppose I may as well end with the big sell, which is, of course, my Patreon. I've got to be honest with you, I've been blown away with the interest in this, and I've had way more people sign up than I ever thought possible, which is amazing because every penny of the Patreon is going towards an aspect of the show, and the money so far has all gone towards the subscription for Restream, which I couldn't have done without you guys. So thank you so much for being involved with the old Team Rock. As he smacks the mic. Team Rock really appreciates it. I know it's only me, but I like to speak in terms of teams. And look, have a great rest of your day. Apologies if I still sound like an old warbling Dalek. Thank you once again to Hannah and Unit 2 for spending some time with us. I hope you found that interesting. I certainly did. I'm absolutely convinced we could have talked for hours, particularly around some of the development stuff. But keep an eye open for the game, and enjoy the rest of your day. I'm about to click finish. I've discovered that if I do it too quick, you lose the last 30 seconds of what I've said. So I'm going to pause for a bit, smile, let you catch up with my audio, and you guys take care. Rock out. I'm just going to press a few buttons and pretend I'm doing stuff. It's like a huge console, and I've got all sorts of things, and I've got staff at the back here that are feeding me information, and I've got green screens, and it's all, honestly, it's a